was a spire in the middle of it, which is pretty remarkable to think about. As Agnes Poirier was telling us earlier, the spire doesn't date back to the original building, and yet still it was part of the whole iconic image of Notre Dame Cathedral. We were wondering, I was wondering earlier whether there had been any tourists, any visitors inside the cathedral at the time that the fire broke out. We think just about the time that the cathedral was going to close for the day to tourists. The Interior Minister's office in Paris, in France, is saying that so far they're not aware of any injuries and any casualties from the fire, which is of course good news. But as we know, as we've been talking about, we believe inside the cathedral at the moment, in the areas in which it is safe to go, they are trying to rescue artworks. That was certainly happening half an hour or so ago. Let's go live to Paris and talk to David Chazan, a former BBC journalist, a journalist working in the city. And David, tell us what you're hearing, what you're seeing.
Well, the authorities say that they're trying to secure the structure. Parts of it, as you were just saying, Matthew, have already collapsed, and they're worried about the rest of it. And the fire brigade have been trying to spray the flames with water from the ground, but they haven't been able to reach most of the flames. So far, what we're seeing is that the flames appear to have engulfed more and more of the cathedral, and the damage must be quite extensive. And as you were saying, officials have been going into the cathedral to try to rescue the priceless works of art that it contains. And the whole of the Ile de la Cité in central Paris, which is an island in the Seine where Notre Dame is located, has been sealed off. And both residential and commercial buildings in the surrounding area have all been evacuated. So there have been crowds of people taken into the streets to safety, just in case the blaze should spread from Notre Dame to other buildings, because Paris, of course, is one of the densest cities in Europe, densest capital cities, and lots of buildings are very close together, and this really is a very big blaze.
Yeah, we heard our colleague Hugh Schofield, who was relatively close to the cathedral a little earlier on in the programme for us, and as he was talking to us, the police were certainly asking him to move back, and countless dozens, hundreds of other people who had gone to that area to have a look at the cathedral. Is there any word on those artworks inside? We were talking to Agnes Poirier earlier, whose apartment overlooks the cathedral. She can see it from there. She was talking about the stained glass windows melting and clearly the concern for art and artifacts inside the cathedral.
Well, I'm sure that is a huge concern, and we know that officials have been doing their best to get the paintings and sculptures in the cathedral to safety. We haven't really had any word on how successful that effort's been. And of course, Emmanuel Macron, the French president, has gone to the scene. He's postponed a televised address to the nation, which he had been due to make to start making about 25 minutes ago. So that has been postponed. And Mr. Macron has also tweeted his concern.
David Chazan, thank you very much indeed for your time, for joining us from Paris.
You are watching BBC News. We're bringing you special coverage of the fire in Paris that has engulfed Notre Dame Cathedral. We have been hearing from eyewitnesses about the huge size of this blaze. The roof has already gone. The spire has already gone. The stained glass windows have melted. We've heard from Agnes Poirier, whose apartment overlooks this, about the incredible emotion of people in Paris tonight watching this, horrified at the speed with which this blaze. It's just been on fire for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, as far as we understand, and the speed with which this has devastated a building that took 200 years to build in the mid 13th century and has been largely destroyed, at least from the roof upwards. Now we understand there's a big fight to try and save what they can from the inside of the cathedral, because of course there are a lot of artworks there, as David Shivazan was just saying, that are trying to be rescued as well. I understand that we can also speak to Christopher Brennan, who is at the scene as well. Christopher, what are you seeing? What have you seen?
I am at the Bridge Saint-Michel, which is maybe about 500 meters to the west of Notre Dame, kind of to the front of it, where you think of it as a tourist destination. I can see that there are water cannons coming from the south side of the building. That's where they've been attacking displays from, at least from my vantage point. And that's a lot of where the smoke was coming from at the beginning. The smoke appears to have shifted a little bit to the center and is less now than maybe it was 15, 20 minutes ago. But they are still actively battling that blaze, and there still is smoke coming out.
Christopher, when did you get to the scene?
I got to the scene, I would say, probably about 6:15, maybe 6:10. I started seeing information about it around 6 o'clock. So as of my knowledge, that's about when it started. Though at that point, the images I was seeing, was it already in full blaze? And
we can now see, for our viewers, the water cannon there, which is, I mean, look, there's one water cannon that we can see there. The firefighters, we saw them earlier on the balcony incredibly bravely near the fire, but they are trying to do what they can. But so much of this has already been damaged. What's the reaction of the crowds where you are, Christopher?
I mean, the crowd is one of sheer horror, really. I've seen multiple people kind of near me in tears as they look at what's happening, and they can see the destruction of a building, which to many is kind of the heart of the city, one man told me. One man, he lives here in the 6th arrondissement, not far from the cathedral. He passes it every day. He sees people going out. There's always festivals there. He said it's not even just a religious monument, even though, of course, it's important. It's part of the city and part of the cultural heritage of the city.
Yeah, and actually, well, the German Chancellor, Christopher, while you've been speaking to us, has been, through her spokesperson, putting out her thoughts that this is, again, it's more than just a religious building. It's a symbol of France, as she puts it, and of our European culture. Her spokesperson went on to say, these are horrible images of Notre Dame on fire. They're painful to watch. I would imagine, Christopher, that around you, that pain is etched on the faces of people. We were talking to someone from Paris earlier, Agnes Poirier, who said she was on the verge of tears.
No, it really is. You can see people. I mean, when it first started, when I got here around 6:10, 6:15, people were taking pictures of it. People were more in awe and more in shock than anything else. But as this kind of continues and you can see the damage, I mean, where there once was part of a roof that should be there, it's no longer there. People can see the destruction with their own eyes, and you can see the tears of their eyes as well.
Christopher Brennan, thank you very much for joining us. Stay safe there as those firefighters continue to try and battle those flames. Anna Kamenova is joining us now on the phone as well, also in Paris. Anna, where are you and what are you seeing?
Hello. I arrived here like 40 minutes ago, and I'm right now on the embankment next to the mairie, the Hôtel de Ville. So I went out of the metro and I just saw this horrible scene. It was just the beginning, and there were a lot of people gathering. I think there's even many more right now, but the fire is calming down. I can see that there's the water coming. And before there was a helicopter around, but everyone was surprised why they're not actually putting down the fire from the helicopter. Why don't they have fire helicopters?
Which actually is something that President Trump has also tweeted about, saying that perhaps that would be one way that they could have tackled this, but those cannons trying to do their job. John Sopel.
Yeah, I mean, if you live in France, if you go to the south of France on the Côte d'Azur, you will regularly, when there is a forest fire, and I covered them when I was the BBC's Paris correspondent, you'd see these, the planes going over the sea, over the Mediterranean, scooping up water, and then flying very low over the area where they disperse the water, where the fire is. Now, they don't have those tankers in Paris because they don't expect to be fighting that sort of fire in Paris. Yeah, on the Côte d'Azur, of course, but not here. And so even if you could you'd have to get the planes loaded with water to fly 600 miles north to get to Paris before you would be able to unload the water. And I guess they're just not equipped for that here. I mean, the thing that has struck me, and what your last guest said, you would think that the fire department in Paris, the pompiers, have got a plan of action for what would happen for fires in some of the most important structures in Paris. And Paris is the most beautiful city, full of the most stunning buildings. And yet it seems that the slowness, and we've only just seen that kind of water coming up onto the building in the last 15 minutes or so. It's been an hour and a half before we saw any kind of activity by the...
From Reuters news agency, witnesses are saying that the Ile de la Cité, which is the little island in the middle of the Seine River on which Notre Dame Cathedral is situated, is in the process of now being evacuated. Anna, you are a photographer and a designer, I imagine, and you sound to me like you are Parisian, at least French. I imagine you've gone many times past Notre Dame and this incredibly beautiful building. What are you feeling about when you see these pictures? Just heartbreaking.
Oh yeah, I even made one which was horrifying, and I'm lucky that I've been there only like 2 weeks ago for a mass on Sunday, and it's terrifying. And I've spoke to my colleagues who are French, and they're all very, very sad, and they're saying it's a real symbol of Paris that is gone, and the landscape of Paris is never going to be the same again. And as for the access to the island, I can see that there's nobody leaving or entering right now. I can see the two bridges from here, and there's no movement, and we cannot enter the island.
Okay, Anna, thank you very much for that update. We're also joined now by Philip Crowther, journalist with the French channel France 24. Philip, what more are you hearing on the status of the building, the operation to try and save what they can of the artworks inside the building as well?
Oh, again, from the pictures that you're seeing, I mean, there just isn't much of an indication that much can be done about this. I think the general consensus is that at least the wooden part of the cathedral will have to be sacrificed, essentially. Now, when you look at those pictures, you've got the two sturdier towers, of course, of Notre Dame Cathedral. They might be, now, we don't know what this is going to look like in the next few hours. They might be almost the only thing that will remain. Again, they are sturdier and they are most likely to survive. They're not engulfed by flames. But, you know, this is a building that stems from the 12th century. It's not much of this is likely to survive. It's incredibly sad. I really don't think that much can be salvaged at this point. I can tell you from my acquaintances in Paris that they're seeing this from a long way out, and they are all just incredibly sad. It is very rare that, you know, we cover a lot of tragic news, of course, in 24-hour news, and this time around it's only, in a sense, a building that is in flames, but there are messages passing from my phone to others and from my friends to mine, all just about their immense sadness, seeing this building being engulfed in flames and nothing being able to be done about it. There's that real feeling of a lack of being able to do anything, really, to stop this. We're really watching this cathedral go down in flames. That at least is the feeling that I'm getting from those who are watching it right now on the ground.
Yeah, I think...
Philip, if I can just interrupt Matthew 1 second, because we just had a tweet here from the spokesman for Notre Dame, André Finot, who is telling the French media that the entire wooden interior of the 12th century landmark is burning and likely to be destroyed. Nothing will remain from the frame. He's telling us, Philip, that's just what you were suggesting there.
Yeah, well, just imagine what this is going to look like maybe in a few days' time. It's an awfully sad thing to contemplate, but considering what the spokesman for Notre Dame just said, in theory, we will only be seeing those two towers that will remain, those two towers that we've all, of course, seen, even if we haven't, those of us who might not have been to Paris, everybody knows this cathedral. I've been to visit it. Of course, I've been in those towers. They will presumably be the only really sturdy thing left standing of Notre Dame Cathedral. It's almost unthinkable that cathedral might be gone by the end of the evening Paris time, and by the time Paris wakes up, it might just be two towers instead of a whole cathedral.
Philip, I mean, that is... Yeah, I was just going to say that, Cathy. I almost don't know where to go from that, Philip, but you're absolutely right. Looking at these pictures, piecing together what we're now learning from those who are closer to the cathedral than journalists and others are being allowed now. And actually, as we speak, looking through the website of the Notre Dame Cathedral, and its whole list of artifacts in there, bells, paintings, statuary, stained glass, it goes on. These are priceless works of art, priceless artifacts.
Yeah, and whether they can rescue any of those, we still don't know. You know, it's so rare, Matthew and John, that we have an event at the moment that brings people together. We cover all the time events that seem to divide us, and everybody tonight looking at what is happening in Paris and looking at these scenes of a monument that we've all known, that is iconic for so many of us, whatever our nationalities, whatever our religions, whatever our languages. A sense of sadness at watching this extraordinary monument
I would
disappear.
imagine an enormously high percentage of our viewers now have been to Paris at some point or another. It is the most breathtakingly beautiful city that you can visit. You just arrive in Paris and there are vistas that still, even though I lived there 20 years ago and have been back several times, you know, I go back annually, there are vistas that just take your breath away. It's just an achingly beautiful city, and perhaps the most achingly beautiful monument in it is Notre Dame, which we're looking at now, which is just being gutted before our eyes. And that is just a vital part of a kind of this wonderful city of Paris, which itself is, you know, if you define the Paris by the périphérique, and then you've got the sort of 20 arrondissements, the 20 districts within Paris. It's actually quite a small city. I mean, yeah, you've got the areas, the suburbs, the banlieue, which make it a much huger city, but Paris is actually quite small. And it's architecturally kind of quite uniform. This is the medieval, magnificent part of the city, and there are other bits of Ile de la Cité and in the Marais as well, where you're going to find bits of medieval France. But it is just this place of utter beauty, this, you know, and the City of Light is not looking that fabulous at the moment.
David Chazan, you're still with us down there near the scene, and darkness is falling. It looks like from the images that we're seeing, it's 2:30 here in Washington, but it's 8:30 there in Paris, and the skyline of Paris changing tonight.
Yes, that's right. The skyline dominated by that huge blaze engulfing one of Europe's most iconic buildings, one of the world's most visited buildings, and a lot of sadness in Paris tonight that a part of the city and the nation's cultural heritage just seems to be being destroyed before our very eyes. Catty, I should just correct you slightly. I live fairly near Notre Dame, but I'm actually spending the night in a Paris suburb this evening. So I'm not actually at the scene, and I haven't been able to go there. But I have spoken to a number of people on the phone who've told me how nearby buildings have been evacuated and how there's been some anger, even some questions about the authorities' response to the fire, with a lot of people wondering why they couldn't do more, why they couldn't get helicopters in, why the fire brigade's response doesn't really seem to have been able to tackle the blaze before it spread so rapidly through this 850-year-old cathedral that is so dear to so many Parisians.
David Chazan in Paris, thank you very much. Let's try and talk now to John Ritchie, a journalist who I believe is relatively close to the cathedral. John?
Hello, yes, I was close to it until about 10 minutes ago.
So just paint us the pictures.
I was crossing the Seine about 7 o'clock this evening, and we saw, I was in a bus, and we saw a small plume of smoke coming from between the two belfries on the facade of Notre Dame, and then down the river. As we drove down the river, I got off the bus to see a fire building extremely rapidly around the spire above the transept of the cathedral. And as we watched, the entire spire was engulfed in flames, sometimes completely hidden from view by thick, billowing yellow smoke. We saw secondary fires starting along the whole roof, first of all towards the choir at the eastern end, and spreading gradually along the roof above the transept. People weeping visibly in the streets. Colossal flames eventually got the better of the spire, which crumbled and I believe probably fell through the roof into the nave, but I couldn't see which side it fell to. It fell in two phases, and then the fire spread right the way along to the front of the cathedral. And when you say gutted, the cathedral and the city, and I think everyone watching could be described that way, say everyone united in this emotion and the tragedy of this destruction.
Well, absolutely, John. And in fact, that description you gave of the spire, we were getting several reports into the newsroom here a little bit earlier that confirmed your worst fears, that the spire had indeed fallen into the body of the cathedral. Presumably, you'd have to assume, therefore, starting, if this was a fire that began in the roof, certainly starting a greater inferno lower down in the cathedral itself. I wonder whether you were in a position, and we haven't had any reports of casualties, in fact, to the contrary, but I wonder if you were in a position to see whether there were perhaps people in the cathedral at the time when the fire started?
No, I was at a distance, and the police very rapidly evacuated people from all around. I did not see any ambulance activity, simply fire activity and police activity. There was, from a position I took up a little later to see round from the northern side, north of the choir, the eastern end of the cathedral, I did see some firemen's hose. But when people talk about the incapacity or an inability to put out the fire, when you saw the volume of water compared with the inferno, I think there was very little chance of any even colossal pieces of fire equipment have any effect on that raging blaze.
Okay, John Ritchie, thank you very much for joining us. And a few moments ago, our Paris correspondent Lucy Williamson has sent us this update.
All along the banks of the Seine, stretching away from this cathedral, people are lining the pavements here in Paris, staring up at the sky, at the plumes of smoke billowing out of Notre Dame Cathedral, visible across Paris, the acrid smell of the cathedral burning. It's only been going about an hour or so, but already the flames seem to have completely engulfed the roof, wrapping themselves around the turrets at the back here. We're not quite sure yet what's caused this fire. There's some suggestion it could be linked to extensive renovation works that were being carried out here. And we're told President Macron is now on his way here to address the firefighters. This cathedral has been damaged so many times in its history. It's been here almost 1,000 years, but never anything like this. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Paris.
That's Lucy Williamson, our correspondent in Paris, as we bring you a special programme which is focusing entirely on what is obviously a catastrophic fire at one of the world's most iconic, most famous, most visited buildings, the Notre Dame Cathedral in the heart of Paris, which has been on fire now for at least 2 hours, perhaps slightly more than that. As we've been watching these live pictures over the last couple of hours, we've seen the flames slowly build up, and now in the last half hour or so, it does appear that they are subsiding to a certain extent, or are certainly no longer concentrated on the roof. We've had eyewitnesses describe what they saw in the moments after the first smoke started to appear in the Parisian skyline this evening. The fire very definitely taking hold on the roof and then moving closer and closer to the cathedral's spire, which then, if my memory serves me right from what people have been telling us, about an hour into the fire, about an hour since the fire was first started, that spire then itself caught fire. And eventually, and we've had this confirmed now from officials on the ground, the spire itself collapsed into the cathedral. There has been no reports of any injuries. In fact, to the contrary, the French Interior Ministry has told us that there are no injuries at this stage that they know about. The cathedral, we believe, would have been open, just about still open at the time that the fire took hold, and yet, as our eyewitnesses have been telling us here on the BBC, the police got people away from the building very quickly indeed. And so the fight, Catty, over the last couple of hours has been not just on bringing those flames under control, and it looks like they really haven't got the equipment to do that. I mean, just look at the heat inside there at the heart of that fire. But the fight also, Catty, has been on trying to salvage some of the artwork, some of the priceless artefacts that were inside the Notre Dame Cathedral.
Yeah, you just saw it there at the bottom of the picture for our viewers. There's one water jet. We've been seeing that for the last 20 minutes or so, but I'm sure there are other angles. We know the firefighters are all doing all they can. President Macron on his way there. He's cancelled his big political address. They will be trying to get this under control, but it looks like they are under-resourced or under-prepared or under-equipped to deal with a fire of this magnitude. And of course, lots of wooden beams inside this cathedral, and they will have been attracting the fire as well. We can speak now to author Ken Follett, who is the author, of course, of Pillars of the Earth, has spent many years, Ken. You've studied the construction of these cathedrals. You're looking at these photographs now, these images coming out of Paris. Ken, what's going through your mind?
Well, there's an uncanny resemblance to a scene in the Pillars of the Earth in which Jack sets fire to the old cathedral. The only part that will actually burn is the rafters in the roof, and they are made of they're made of wood, and they're very old and they're very dry. And there's hundreds of tons of timber in that roof, and when it burns, the roof above falls, and I'm trying to remember whether those are tiles or slates or whether it's a stone roof, but whatever it is, the roof is very heavy. It falls when the rafters burn, and then that debris will crash onto the top of the curved vaults that you see when you stand in Notre Dame. Look up, you see the curved vaulting, which is made of stone, very thin stones in those wonderful curving shapes. And of course, the falling roof will destroy that ceiling, and so hundreds of tons of debris will then fall, and it will destroy the pillars that are holding the whole structure up. That's how it works. The stone itself obviously doesn't burn, but it just gets destroyed by what's falling. And it looks, boy, I'm hoping that the two square towers at the west end might just conceivably survive this, but it looks as if nothing else will.
Ken, I remember from reading your books, you've had scenes of fires in cathedrals and this kind of devastation to churches. And I think many people will be watching this and thinking, how does it happen so fast?
Well, I think it's in the Middle Ages, of course, cathedrals often burned, but it was usually because the poor monks during the services were so darn cold in the cathedral that they would quite often be tempted to light a fire, and that was often the beginning of a fire in a cathedral in the Middle Ages. Now here, look, everybody looking at these pictures is saying how intense the fire is and how red the flames are, and I think there's a mystery about it. Doesn't look like something that was started by something trivial, does it? Everything seems to have gone up in a whoosh, and I agree that I'm not sure that my explanation of hundreds of tons of dry wood is sufficient. I wonder if something else happened that we don't know about yet.
Okay, Ken Follett, author of Pillars of the Earth, who studied, of course, the construction of cathedrals. Many people have read your construction of it and read your scenes of fires in cathedral. Now, so sadly, we are watching this play out in real life in Paris. Ken, thanks very much for joining me.
Yes,
Pleasure,
just awful scenes, Catty, as anybody watching this will be able to comprehend. And the continued description from people like Ken Follett about the possibility that nothing may be left of this cathedral when this fire is finally out, apart from perhaps the iconic towers at the front of it. We're joined now by one of the most senior French politicians, Ségolène Royal, a former energy minister, former Socialist Party candidate for the presidency. Ségolène Royal, I suppose the first thing to express is our sympathies to you, and to ask how you are feeling, how France is feeling.
Yes, it's an unfortunate tragedy. It is France as a whole who suffer and cry, because centuries of French and world history go up in smoke.
What do you feel as you look at the images of the fire at Notre Dame?
I am so sad to see this event. And as a representative of the French politicians, I want to share my sadness with all the French people.
There is some criticism, I understand, early criticism of the response. It feels too early to have that sort of criticism. But are you in any position to talk about how prepared or otherwise the French firefighters and the authorities may have been for something like this?
No, it's too early. We don't know anything just now. It's a time for...
And Ségolène Royal, of course, it will be lost on no Christians around the world that yesterday was Palm Sunday, next weekend is Easter Sunday, the Holy Week in the Christian Church, and for as President Macron has pointed out, Catholics in Paris, Christians in Paris, will be watching their beloved Notre Dame burn in this very holy spiritual week.
It's not only for Catholic and Christians. It's all French people and all around the world, because it's the most important monument in Europe, which is the most visited. And the history belongs not only to Christians, but I think that everybody is very sad tonight, whatever the religion.
Ms. Royal, we heard earlier from Ken Follett, who studied the construction of these buildings, that what can happen in a fire like this is that the roof collapses into the building. Yes. Do you think that is why this blaze spread so quickly and so ferociously?
It's a good explanation. Right, it's a good explanation.
Okay, Ségolène Royal, thank you very much for joining the programme. John Sopel, you've been watching this, you've been listening to our guests. It's just as the sun sets in Paris on the City of Light and we watch Notre Dame disappearing before our eyes, I think many people will be watching this thinking, just wishing they could reach out and rescue this building.
And the outpouring of emotion, I've just been kind of monitoring Twitter and what people have been saying, and this sense of profound sadness and shock, but also that kind of sense of fragility that this edifice that took 200 years to build has been standing for 850 years, and in the space of an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes, it looks like large parts of it are reduced to rubble. The roof has disappeared. The spire has collapsed inwardly. There is a raging fire still burning, not as intently as it was when we came on air.
Of course, we don't know what's happening inside the building.
And we don't know what's happening inside the building, but we know that the stained glass has melted, that there has been such epic levels of destruction on this architectural jewel of the world. And what the Parisian authorities, what the church decides to do next, obviously that's for the days and weeks to come. But what we are looking at is a sense of loss and a sense of how fragile it is, because who would have ever thought, when you've stood on Ile de la Cité and you've looked up at the Notre Dame Cathedral in all its majesty with the flying buttresses and the ugly gargoyles and all the rest of it, you just marvelled. And to think that that has just gone like that is somehow hard to comprehend, and although we live in a kind of 24/7 news culture, actually processing this is really difficult.
And just listening to you there, John, and to what Cathy said earlier, I mean, we have literally over the last hour of this programme been watching Notre Dame burn and collapse. Well, not collapse, but its spire come down, its roof collapse as the firefighters battle. It looks against all the odds. Let's go to France then and talk finally to French Senator Nathalie Goulet. Is there any way, Nathalie Goulet, in which you can sum up the feeling for French people this evening?
Oh, sadness, and probably we are all speechless. You know, everybody is just stuck in front of the TV and watching, because, you know, when you see some monument collapsing abroad, you always think that it's for abroad. I mean, it's for foreign countries, and, you know, you saw a lot of masterpieces burned during wars, and even by Daesh, you know, when we had some masterpieces in Tombouctou or other places, and you never think that something like that can happen in your own country. You think that those think of beauty, as we say, a joy forever. But now it's over, which is terribly shocking.
And it does look as though this building, in the majesty that it had just a matter of hours ago, it does look as if this building has been certainly damaged for many, many years. If there is to ever be any reconstruction, it will take a long time.
Oh, it will be. It will take a long time, and then it will also take a long time for people to realize what happened. You know, it's a shock. It's a massive shock, and what we see it's also a kind of national union around this unfortunate accident, and even the President Macron, you know, didn't achieve the speech that he has to deliver tonight. Because of this event, so it's really heartbreaking, and it's a heart of Paris, but heart of France, and also a masterpiece for the world. So it's terribly sad.
It absolutely is, Nathalie Goulet. Terribly sad. Our sympathies to you and to all French people this evening.
Thank you.
And we are watching tonight Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris burning in front of our eyes. This cathedral that was built in the 12th and 13th century, that has stood for 850 years as a monument in the middle of Paris, visited by millions of people from around the world every single year. The heart of the City of Light in flames tonight, and we are hearing that not much left of it could be standing when Parisians wake up tomorrow morning. And there we have the French president arriving to see the most famous French monument being destroyed before our eyes. We are thinking tonight of Paris and of the Cathedral of Notre Dame.
You're watching a BBC News special.